The footsteps had stopped. The platform was silent again. The investigators stood in the darkness, staring toward the tunnel. Then they saw it. A light. Far away. Small at first. Almost invisible through the fog. It grew brighter. The sound came next. A low vibration beneath their feet. Then, the whistle. The same whistle they had heard before. The train was coming back. Nobody spoke. They watched as the old black train slowly emerged from the tunnel. It moved without a visible driver. Its windows were dark. Its metal body was wet with rain. There was no destination displayed above the front carriage. No railway number, no company markings, nothing. The train stopped directly in front of them. The doors opened. The investigators remained still. They remembered what had happened the first time. They remembered the passenger. They remembered seat 17. And they remembered the black file. One investigator looked down. The file was still lying on the platform. He picked it up. The cover was cold, but something was different. The symbol on the front had disappeared. The cover was completely black. No number, no name, no marking. Then the investigator heard something from inside the train. A faint sound, paper moving. He looked through the open door. The carriage was empty. Every seat was vacant, except one, seat 17. Something was lying on it. The investigator stepped inside. His colleagues followed. The carriage smelled old, like dust, rain, and something metallic. They reached seat 17. The object was a black folder. Another black file. The investigator stopped. He slowly looked down at the file in his hands. Then at the identical file on the seat. There were now two. He placed the first one beside the second. They looked exactly the same. Same size, same black cover. Same worn edges, same weight, but there was one difference. The file on the seat had a small white label. The investigator leaned closer. 3 words were printed on it. Case 8. Nobody moved. The investigator opened it. The first page contained a photograph. It showed this exact train. This exact carriage. This exact seat. And the 4 investigators standing around it. He looked up. They were standing in the same positions shown in the photograph. He turned the page. Another photograph. This time, it showed them opening the file. He looked at his hands. He had not opened it yet. But the photograph showed him doing it. He turned another page. A third photograph. It showed the exact moment they were looking at the photograph. The investigator's face went pale. The black file was recording events before they happened. Again, he turned the page faster. Photograph after photograph. The train, the platform, the investigators, the suitcase, the passenger. Every image showed something that had either already happened or was about to happen. Then he reached the final photograph. It showed the train leaving the station. Only 3 investigators were standing on the platform. The 4th was missing. Nobody spoke. The investigator looked around. All 4 were still there. Then he looked at the photograph again. On the back was a handwritten sentence. "One of you will not leave this train." The carriage lights suddenly flickered. Once, twice. Then every light turned red. A sound came from the end of the carriage. 3 slow knocks. Knock, silence. Knock, silence, knock. The investigators turned toward the final door. Nobody was there. Then the door slowly opened. Beyond it was another carriage. But it should not have existed. The train only had 7 carriages. This was the 8th. And inside the darkness, someone was waiting. The investigator holding the black file took 1 step forward. Then the voice came from inside. Calm. Familiar. Almost a whisper. "You came back for the evidence." The investigator froze. He knew that voice. It belonged to the passenger. Then the voice continued. "But you still don't understand what the evidence is." The investigators stood outside the 8th carriage. Nobody wanted to enter. The voice had disappeared. The door remained open. Beyond it was complete darkness. One investigator raised his flashlight. The beam entered the carriage. Empty seats, old windows, dust-covered walls, and at the far end, another door. The carriage seemed much longer than the train should have allowed. He stepped inside. The others followed. The door behind them closed. Nobody touched it. They turned. The handle would not move. They were locked inside. Then the lights came on. Dim, yellow, flickering. The carriage was not empty. Photographs covered the walls. Hundreds of them. The signal, the witness, the room, the photograph, the call, the file. The passenger. Every case from the black file appeared there, but these were not copies. They were originals. Evidence that had supposedly disappeared. The investigator approached the first photograph. It showed the signal from the first case. The same strange waveform, the same timestamp, but there was something new. A small figure stood in the background. The passenger. The investigator moved to the next photograph. The witness who remembered tomorrow. Again, the passenger appeared. Then the room with no beginning. Again. The man in the final photograph. Again. The call from 317. Again. Every case had one connection. The passenger had been present before the investigators knew about him. The investigator turned toward the others. This wasn't a collection of cases. What do you mean? It was one case. He looked at the photographs. One story. The lights flickered. A photograph fell from the wall. The investigator picked it up. It showed the railway platform, the same platform they had just left. The photograph was dated 3 days earlier, but there was something impossible about it. The investigators were standing in the image, all four, exactly where they had been moments ago. The investigator looked at the others. How could this have been taken? Nobody answered. He turned the photograph over. A message was written on the back. You will find this after you find the file. He stared at the words. Then another photograph fell. Then another. Soon dozens of photographs were scattered across the floor. Each one showed something from their investigation, but the dates were wrong. Some were dated tomorrow, some next week, some years earlier. One photograph was dated 1998. It showed the same train, the same carriage, the same seat, and the same 4 investigators. But none of them had been born into the investigation yet. One investigator picked it up. His hands trembled. How is this possible? The passenger's voice came through the carriage. You keep asking the wrong question. They turned. The passenger was standing at the far end. The same dark coat, the same black suitcase, the same expression. The investigator stepped toward him. Who are you? The passenger did not answer. What is this train? Still nothing. Where does it go? The passenger looked at the photographs. Where the evidence goes. The investigator held up the photograph. Who took these? The passenger finally looked directly at him. You did. No, you always do. The investigator shook his head. I have never taken these photographs. The passenger's expression remained calm. Not yet. Then he disappeared. Not walked away. Not turned around. He simply vanished. The investigators rushed toward the place where he had been standing. Nothing. Only the black suitcase remained. They opened it. Inside was a camera. An old film camera. The investigator picked it up. The film was still inside. He opened the back. The film was empty. No photographs. No exposed frames. Nothing. Then the camera suddenly clicked. Once. The investigator froze. Another click. Then another. The camera was taking photographs by itself. They pulled the film out. A nearby wall contained an old developing machine. They placed the film inside. Minutes later, the first photograph appeared. The investigator held it under the light. His face changed. It showed the 4 investigators standing inside the carriage. But behind them, the passenger was holding the black file. And beneath the image was a timestamp. 3:17 a.m. The investigator checked his watch. It was 3:16. 1 minute remained. Then the camera clicked again. A second photograph emerged. This one showed the same room, but only 3 investigators were visible. The 4th was standing behind the camera. Taking the picture, the investigator slowly turned toward the 4th member of the group. The man was staring at him. Then he said, I don't remember taking it. The train suddenly began moving. The carriage shook. The lights went dark. And somewhere ahead, a telephone began ringing. Exactly 3 times. 3:17 a.m. The telephone kept ringing. 3 times. Then silence. The train continued moving through darkness. The investigators could feel the carriage shaking beneath them, but there were no visible tracks outside the windows. Only blackness. One investigator looked at the clock above the door. 3:17 a.m. The same time. Always the same time. He looked down at the photograph from the camera. The image had changed. The 4 investigators were still standing inside the carriage, but now the passenger was gone. Instead, someone else stood behind them. A man holding a camera. The investigator stared at the photograph, then slowly looked at the 4th investigator. You were holding the camera. I wasn't. You are in the photograph. So are you. That doesn't explain who took it. Nobody answered. Then another photograph slid from the developing machine. The investigator picked it up. This one showed the railway platform. The train was arriving. 4 investigators were standing on the platform. But the photograph had been taken before they arrived. On the back was a date, 3 days earlier. The investigator turned it over again. A second message had appeared. The evidence returns when someone remembers. He looked at the others. Remembers what? Nobody knew. Then the train suddenly stopped. The carriage became completely silent. The doors opened. Beyond them was the same railway platform they had left. But something was wrong. The platform was empty. No rain, no fog, no darkness. The station looked exactly as it had in 2003. Old signs, old lamps, old railway advertisements. The investigators stepped onto the platform. One of them looked at his watch. It still showed 3:17. The clocks on the station wall showed 3:17. Every clock showed 3:17. Then they noticed something on the opposite platform. A man was standing there. The passenger. He was holding a photograph. The investigator walked toward him. How did we get here? The passenger looked at the photograph. You returned. From where? The place you left. That makes no sense. The passenger smiled faintly. It will. The investigator pointed at the photograph. Where did you get that? The passenger handed it to him. It showed the investigator standing on the platform, but the passenger was not in the picture. Instead, someone else stood behind them. A woman. The investigator recognized her. She was the witness from the second case. The witness who remembered tomorrow, but she had disappeared years earlier. The investigator looked up. She's alive? The passenger shook his head. No. Then why is she here? She isn't. The investigator looked at the photograph again. The woman was holding something, a black folder. The original black file. The investigator suddenly understood. The evidence was not simply returning. It was bringing pieces of the old cases back with it. Memories, photographs, voices, people who had disappeared from the records. The passenger looked toward the train. You have 7 minutes. 7 minutes for what? To remember the first case. The investigator frowned. The signal? No. The witness? No. The room? No. Then what? The passenger looked directly at him. The evidence. Then he disappeared again. The investigator ran toward the place where he had been standing. Nothing. Only a photograph remained. He picked it up. The photograph showed the railway platform, but the passenger was gone. The investigators were gone. The train was gone. Only one person remained, the photographer. The investigator turned the photograph over. There was a name written on the back. A name none of them recognized. Then one of the investigators suddenly spoke. I know that name. Everyone turned. How? He looked confused. I don't know. You just said you knew it. I remember hearing it. Where? He closed his eyes. Then his expression changed. Inside the room. What room? The room with no beginning. The first investigator stared at him. The pieces were beginning to connect. The cases were not separate. Each one contained a fragment of the next. The room had contained the name. The witness had remembered it. The call had mentioned it. The photograph had shown it. The passenger had carried it, and now the evidence had returned. The investigator looked toward the old train. One carriage door was still open. Inside was the black file. He walked toward it. Before he stepped inside, he heard a voice behind him. Not the passenger, not the investigators. A woman's voice. Quiet. Almost impossible to hear, she whispered. You are not investigating the black file. He turned. Nobody was there. Then the voice continued. The black file is investigating you. The investigators returned to the train. Nobody spoke. The sentence stayed in their minds. The black file is investigating you. The carriage door closed behind them. The train began moving again. Slowly, then faster. The investigator opened the file. The first page was blank. Then a photograph appeared. It showed the signal from the first case. The strange waveform. The same unexplained transmission. But beneath it was a new timestamp. 3:17 a.m. The investigator turned the page. The witness from the second case. Another page. The room with no beginning. Another. The man in the final photograph. Then the call from 317. Every case was there, but the evidence was different. The original signal recording had returned. The witness's handwritten statement had returned. The photograph had returned. The telephone recording had returned. The missing file had returned. Everything they believed was gone, was back. But each piece contained something new. The investigator played the original signal. Static filled the carriage. Then a voice appeared beneath the noise. A voice they had never heard before. "Do not follow the passenger." The recording ended. They looked at each other. The investigator played it again. Same words. Then the witness's statement. A sentence had appeared that was not in the original copy. "He is not the beginning." The investigator turned to the photograph. The image had changed. The passenger was still standing beside the train, but now someone stood behind him. The photographer. The investigator zoomed in. The face remained hidden. Then he looked at the 317 telephone recording. The recording began with static, then the passenger's voice. "The evidence came back because you forgot." The investigator stopped the recording. Forgot what? Nobody answered. Then one of the investigators noticed writing on the train window. Letters had appeared in the condensation. "Remember the first file." He wiped the glass. The words remained. He wiped again. Still there. Then another line appeared. It was not the signal. The investigators stared at it. The first case had always been considered the beginning, the signal that predicted death. But now the black file was telling them something else. There had been an earlier case, something that happened before the signal, something that created the entire chain. They searched the returned evidence. Nothing. Then the investigator noticed a photograph hidden behind the back cover. It was extremely old. The image showed a railway station. The date was difficult to read. 1958. A man stood beside a train. The mysterious passenger. Same face. Same coat. Same suitcase. But there was another person beside him. An investigator. The investigator looked carefully. The man in the photograph was not someone from the past. He recognized the face. It was one of them. The youngest investigator stepped backward. "That isn't possible." The others stared at him. He looked exactly like the man in the photograph, but older. Much older. The investigator took the photograph. His hands were shaking. "How old is this?" The date said 1958. He was not even born then. The passenger appeared behind them. Nobody heard him enter. He spoke quietly. "You keep searching for proof that the file exists." The investigators turned. The passenger continued. "You should be searching for proof that you don't." "What does that mean?" The passenger looked at the photograph. "You think the evidence is returning?" He paused. "It isn't." The investigator stared at him. "Then what is happening?" The passenger answered. "You are returning to it." The train suddenly stopped. The lights went out. Then every photograph on the walls began falling. One after another, hundreds of photographs covered the floor. The investigator picked up the first one. The 1958 photograph was gone. In its place was a new photograph. It showed the same station, but the investigators were standing there. Today, the photograph had been taken only seconds earlier. The passenger was gone. The train was gone. Only the investigators remained. And behind them was a door. A door that did not exist anywhere inside the station. The investigator looked up. The same door was now visible at the end of the carriage. It slowly opened. Beyond it was complete darkness. Then a voice came from inside. The same voice from the telephone. "You have 6 minutes." The door opened wider, and the investigators stepped toward the darkness. The investigators entered the darkness. The door closed behind them. For several seconds there was nothing. No train, no railway. No sound. Then a small red light appeared ahead. It was a recording device. An old cassette player sitting on a wooden desk. Beside it was a tape. The label contained only one number, 317. One investigator pressed play. Static filled the room. Then a man's voice appeared. The voice was calm. Familiar. It was the passenger. "You found the evidence." The investigators looked at each other. The recording continued. "But you still don't understand what it is." The tape crackled. "You think the black file contains the truth." A pause. "It does not." The investigator leaned closer. "It contains what happened after the truth was removed." The tape stopped. Nobody moved. Then it started again. "You have 7 minutes." The investigator checked his watch. 3:18 a.m. The recording continued. "By the time you hear this, you will already have opened the second file." The investigator looked down. The black file was still in his hands. How did he know? The recording answered before anyone could. "Because you always do." The tape continued. "You will search for the passenger. You will search for the photographer. You will search for the first file." But none of them are the beginning. The investigators listened in silence. Then the voice became quieter. The beginning is the moment someone decides to look. The tape clicked. Silence. Then another voice appeared. A woman's voice. The witness. The same woman from the second case. She whispered, "Don't trust the file." The tape ended. The investigator rewound it. The woman's voice was gone. Only the passenger remained. He listened again. Nothing about the witness. He played it a third time. Still nothing. One investigator stared at him. Did we all hear her? Nobody answered. Then the cassette player clicked by itself. The tape began playing again. But this time, the voice was different. It was the investigator's own voice. "Don't open the final page." He froze. The others looked at him. "That isn't me." The recording continued. "Whatever happens, don't open the final page." The investigator stepped away from the machine. "How could my voice be on a recording?" Then another sentence played. "Because you recorded it." The tape stopped. The room went silent. A camera shutter clicked behind them. They turned. A camera stood on a tripod. Its lens was pointed directly at them. Nobody had placed it there. The red recording light was on. The camera clicked again, then again. The investigator walked toward it. A photograph slowly emerged from the side. He pulled it free. The image showed the room. All 4 investigators were standing around the recording device. But behind them stood the passenger. He was holding the black file. The investigator turned around. Nobody was there. He looked back at the photograph. The passenger had moved closer. Another photograph emerged. This time, the passenger was standing directly behind him. The investigator slowly turned. Nothing. The camera clicked again. Another photograph. The passenger was now standing beside the camera. The investigator stepped backward. The camera clicked again. A 4th photograph appeared. The passenger was gone, but the investigator was holding the camera. He looked down. His hands were empty. The photograph fell to the floor. On the back was a message. "You have 6 minutes." The investigator looked at his watch. 3:21 a.m. Only 3 minutes had passed, but the recording had said 7. Something was wrong. Then the walls began to change. The wooden room disappeared. The railway carriage returned. The investigators were standing inside the 8th carriage again, but the passenger was gone. The black file lay open on the floor. One new page had appeared. At the top was a single heading, "The Photographer." Below it was a photograph. The investigator picked it up. His expression changed. The photographer's face was finally visible. It was someone they knew, someone who had been present from the very beginning, someone who had never appeared in the official records. And beneath the photograph was one final sentence. "He has been taking your photographs since the first case." The investigator stared at the photograph. The face was familiar, but he could not place it. He passed the photograph to the others. One by one, they studied it. Then the oldest investigator spoke. "I have seen him before." "Where?" He pointed toward the black file. "In the first case." They opened the original signal report. There was a photograph attached to the bottom. A railway control room. 3 investigators. 1 technician. And in the background, the same man. The photographer. They searched the second case. He was there too, standing behind the witness. Almost invisible. Then the third. The 4th, the 5th, the 6th, every case contained him. He was never the focus, never mentioned, never recorded, but he was always there, watching, taking photographs. The investigator looked at the passenger's photograph again. The passenger was standing beside him. Then something became obvious. The photographer and the passenger were never photographed together by accident. They always appeared near the same evidence, the same moment, the same time. 3:17 a.m. The investigator opened the black file. A new page appeared. It contained only one sentence. The photographer knows where the file came from. The train suddenly shook. The lights flickered. Then the carriage began moving. Slowly, the investigators looked through the windows. The station was disappearing. They were entering a tunnel. The tunnel seemed endless. No lights, no signs, no other tracks. Then the train stopped. The doors opened. Outside was a small room. A room that should not have been there. Inside was a desk, a chair, a camera, and hundreds of photographs. The investigators entered. The door closed behind them. The room was covered from floor to ceiling with photographs. Every photograph showed the black file. different places, different years, different people. But the file was always there. One investigator moved closer. He noticed a photograph dated 1958, another dated 1974, another 1981, another 2003, another 2014, another yesterday. The black file appeared in every one. The investigator looked at the camera on the desk. It was an old film camera, the same model shown in the photographs. He picked it up. There was film inside. The film counter showed 000. He pressed the shutter. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. The camera clicked. The counter changed. 001. A photograph appeared from the side. The investigator pulled it out. It showed the room, exactly as it looked now, but the photograph had been taken from behind them. He turned around. No one was there. Another click. Another photograph. This time the image showed the investigators entering the room. Again, taken from behind. Another click. The image showed the passenger standing at the door. Another click. The passenger was gone. Another click. The black file was sitting on the desk. The investigator looked at the real desk. The file was not there. Then he looked at the photograph. The file was clearly visible. He turned around. The black file was now sitting on the desk. Nobody had seen it appear. The investigator approached it. He opened the cover. The first page contained a photograph of the room. The second contained the investigators. The third contained the passenger. Then the fourth page showed something impossible. A photograph of the photographer. The face was finally clear. The investigator stared. He recognized him. It was the missing railway employee from the 1996 report, the man who had supposedly forgotten ever working on the railway. But the photograph showed him holding the same camera, the same black file, the same suitcase, and standing beside him was the passenger. The investigator looked at the date, 1996. Then he looked at the photograph again. The photographer looked exactly the same. No aging, no change. The investigator whispered, "He's the passenger." One of the others shook his head. "No." He pointed at the image. "Look, the passenger was standing beside the photographer, but the photographer was holding a ticket. Seat 17. The passenger was holding the camera. They had been wrong. The passenger was not the photographer. The photographer was not the passenger. They were two different people, two different roles, and one of them had been watching the black file for decades. Then the camera clicked by itself. The final photograph emerged. The investigator picked it up. His face went pale. It showed the four investigators standing inside the room. But behind them was the black file's original creator, and the date beneath the photograph was 1958. The countdown had not been counting down to something that would happen. It had been counting down to something that had already happened. The investigators just had not reached it yet. The photograph remained on the table. Nobody touched it. The man in the image was impossible. He looked exactly like the missing railway employee from 1996. But the photograph was dated 1958, more than 3 decades before that employee was supposedly born. The investigator picked up the photograph. On the back was a handwritten name, Elias Voss. Nobody recognized it. Then one investigator opened an old railway archive on his tablet. He searched the name. One result appeared. Elias Voss, Railway Systems Technician. Employment began, 1958. Employment ended, 1996. Reason for departure, unknown. The investigator stared at the screen. The same man had worked for the railway for 38 years. But there was no photograph in his employee file, no address, no birth certificate, no death record. Just one name, Elias Voss. Then they found his final report. It was dated October 14, 1996. The report contained only one sentence. The passenger has returned. The investigator read it again. Then another document appeared. A maintenance report. Station 17. Date, October 14, 2003. The investigator's hands stopped moving. 7 years after Elias Voss supposedly left the railway, his name appeared again, this time as the technician who inspected the abandoned station. But there was something stranger. The signature on both reports was identical. Same handwriting, same signature, same person. Yet the railway records claimed he had not worked there during those 7 years. The investigators searched further. They found his name in 2014, then 2021, then the present year, always connected to the same railway. always around the same impossible events. The photographer had been moving through the cases for decades. But why? The investigator returned to the photographs. He placed them chronologically: 1958, 1959, 1960, 1961, 1962, 1963, present day. The black file appeared in every period. Then he noticed something. The file itself changed. The earliest photographs showed a small black notebook. Later photographs showed a larger folder. Then the modern black file. It was evolving, growing, collecting evidence. The investigator whispered, it was being built. The passenger appeared behind them. Nobody heard him arrive. He looked at the photographs. You finally understand. The investigator turned. Who created the black file? The passenger looked toward the oldest photograph. Elias. Why? He wanted proof. Proof of what? The passenger paused. That the passenger existed. The investigator frowned. You? The passenger shook his head. Not me. He pointed toward the photograph. The first passenger. The investigator looked at the old image. A train. A platform. A man standing beside seat 17. But this time, he noticed something he had never seen before. The passenger was not wearing the dark coat. He was wearing a railway uniform. The investigator looked at the passenger. You were a railway employee. The passenger remained silent. Who were you? The passenger finally answered. I was the one who opened the door. What door? The first one. Then the lights went out. When they returned, the passenger was gone. Only his suitcase remained. The investigator opened it. Inside was the original black file. Not a copy, not another version. The first file, the cover was older, the pages were yellow. The first page contained a handwritten date, October 14th, 1958. The investigator turned the page. There was a photograph, a train, Station 17, and a group of railway workers. One of them was Elias Voss. Another was the mysterious passenger. The investigator looked closer. There was a third person, a young man standing beside them. His face was clear. The investigator recognized him. It was the same man who had been taking the photographs throughout the entire investigation. But he was not old. He was young, and beside him was the first black file. The investigator turned the photograph over. A sentence was written on the back. We found the evidence. Then another line. It came back. The investigator looked at the title of the file. For the first time, he understood it. The black file had not been named because it was dark. It had been named because nobody knew where it came from. The evidence kept disappearing, then returning, again and again, across decades. The investigator closed the file. A final sound came from the tunnel, a train whistle. The passenger's voice echoed from somewhere in the darkness. Now you know who took the first photograph. The investigator looked toward the tunnel. Then the voice continued. But you still don't know who was standing behind him. The investigators stared into the tunnel. Nobody moved. The passenger's final words remained in the darkness. You still don't know who was standing behind him. The investigator looked back at the oldest photograph. Elias Voss was standing beside the train. The passenger stood beside him, and behind them, someone was watching. The figure was almost completely hidden. Only part of the face was visible. The investigator enlarged the photograph. The image became distorted. He enlarged it again. The face became clearer. Everyone in the room went silent. It was the same face they had seen in the newest photographs. The photographer. But there was something impossible about him. He appeared in the 1958 photograph. He appeared in 1996. He appeared in 2003. He appeared in 2014. And he appeared in the present. Always the same age. Always holding the same camera. The investigator turned toward the camera sitting on the desk. The old machine was still there. He picked it up. There was a name engraved beneath the lens. E. Voss. He looked at the photograph again. Elias wasn't the photographer. The oldest investigator shook his head. No. He built the file. Yes. Then who took the first photograph? Nobody answered. The investigator opened the original black file. The first page contained a handwritten report. October 14th, 1958. Station 17.0317 a.m. Then a single sentence. A passenger arrived without a ticket. The investigator turned the page. A photograph. The mysterious passenger standing beside the train. He looked younger, but it was clearly him. Another page. A railway employee lying on the platform. Another, a black suitcase. Another, a photograph of the station clock. The hands pointed to 3:17. Then came a page covered in handwritten notes. The investigator read them slowly. Elias Voss had discovered that a passenger appeared at Station 17 at exactly 3:17 a.m. The passenger had no ticket, no identity, no recorded arrival, but he knew things that had not happened yet. Elias began photographing him. Every photograph revealed something different: a future event, a missing person, a destroyed record, a death that had not yet occurred. Elias believed the photographs were evidence of something impossible. So he created the black file. But then something went wrong. The final entry was dated 7 days later, October 21, 1958. Only one sentence was written. The evidence came back. The investigators looked at one another. The phrase was the same, the title of their final case. The evidence that came back. The investigator turned the page. Nothing. Then another page. Nothing. The rest of the original file was blank, except for one photograph. It showed Elias standing inside Station 17. He was holding the black file. Behind him stood the passenger, and behind the passenger stood the photographer. The investigator looked at the photograph, then noticed something in the background. A fourth figure, someone standing behind the photographer. He zoomed in. The face was hidden, but the clothing was familiar. A dark coat, a railway employee's uniform, and a small badge. The investigator whispered, "There's someone else." The others moved closer. The badge contained a number, 17. The investigator searched the old railway records. The number belonged to a position that no longer existed. Station keeper, Station 17. Then he found the name. Unknown. No first name. No last name. No photograph. Only one handwritten note. Do not record the keeper. The investigators suddenly understood. There had been 4 people at the beginning: Elias Voss, the passenger, the photographer, and the station keeper. The station keeper had never been recorded, never photographed clearly, never identified, and every time the black file returned, the station keeper remained hidden. The investigator turned to the final page. A sentence slowly appeared. The first file was never the first. The lights flickered. The train whistle sounded again. The investigators looked toward the tunnel. The old train was returning, but this time, something was different. There was a person standing at the front of the platform, a figure wearing an old railway uniform, the station keeper. He stood perfectly still. Then he raised one hand and pointed toward the investigators. The black file suddenly closed. The investigator heard a whisper beside him. The passenger had returned, but his voice was different. For the first time, he sounded afraid. Don't let him see the final page. The investigators froze. The passenger's warning was still echoing through the carriage. Don't let him see the final page. The station keeper remained at the end of the platform. He did not move. He simply watched them. The investigator held the black file against his chest. What happens if he sees it? The passenger looked toward the station keeper. He remembers. Remembers what? Everything. The station keeper slowly began walking toward them. His footsteps echoed across the platform. 1, 2, 3. The investigators stepped backward. The passenger remained completely still. The station keeper stopped beneath the old station clock. The clock showed 3:17 a.m. He looked directly at the black file. Then he raised his hand. The file began shaking. The investigator tightened his grip. Pages started turning by themselves. The station keeper took another step. The photographs inside the file began disappearing, one by one. The signal, the witness, the room, the photograph. The call, the passenger, all gone. Only the final page remained. The investigator held it shut. The station keeper whispered something. Nobody could understand the words. Then the passenger spoke. He wants the evidence. The investigator looked at him. Why? Because he lost it. What did he lose? The passenger looked toward the station keeper. His identity. The station keeper stopped. For the first time, his face became visible. The investigators recognized him. He was Elias Voss. But older. Much older. The same man who had created the first black file. The investigator looked at the passenger. You said Elias created the file. He did. Then why is he here? The passenger answered. Because he never left. The station keeper looked at the investigators, then at the file. He spoke clearly. "You took it." The investigator shook his head. "No. You took the evidence. We found it." "You found what I lost." The station keeper moved closer. "I spent 68 years trying to find it." The investigator stared at him. 68? Elias pointed toward the black file. "That file contains every version of what happened. Every version? Every investigation. Every disappearance. Every attempt to destroy the evidence." The investigator looked at the passenger. "And you?" The passenger remained silent. Elias answered for him. "He was the first one to disappear." The investigator turned. The passenger's face had changed. For the first time, he looked human. Tired. "Afraid," Elias continued. "He entered the train in 1958. He was supposed to return. He never did. He became part of the journey." The investigator finally understood. The passenger had not been traveling through time. He had been trapped inside the same event. Again and again. Every appearance was another attempt to return. Every train, every 317, every photograph, every missing record. The same journey repeating. The investigator looked down at the black file. "So why did it come back now?" Elias looked at him. "Because you finished it." The investigator's face changed. "Finished what?" "The investigation." Elias pointed toward the final page. "You found the passenger. You found the photographer. You found me. And now you found the first file." The investigator slowly opened the final page. Elias shouted, "No!" Too late. The page opened. There was no photograph. Only a mirror. The investigator looked into it. He saw himself. Then the reflection changed. He was wearing the old railway uniform, standing beside the train, holding the black file. Behind him stood Elias. Behind Elias stood the passenger. And behind the passenger was the photographer. All four were standing together. The investigator looked up. The station was empty. The others were gone. Only the passenger remained. He whispered, "Now you understand." The investigator looked at him. "What?" The passenger pointed toward the mirror. "You were always part of the first photograph." The investigator stared. The reflection showed him standing beside the train in 1958. Impossible. Then the mirror cracked. A sound echoed through the station. The train doors opened. The passenger stepped inside. Before entering, he looked back. "This is where you leave." The investigator shook his head. "No." The passenger smiled sadly. "This is where I finally leave." He stepped onto the train. The doors closed. The train began moving, slowly, then faster. The investigator watched it disappear into the tunnel. For the first time, the passenger did not return. The station became silent. Elias was gone. The photographer was gone. The black file remained. The investigator picked it up. The final page had changed. 4 words were written across it. The evidence came back. Then, underneath, but not everyone did. The station was silent. The train had disappeared into the tunnel. The passenger was gone. Elias was gone. The photographer was gone. Only the black file remained. The investigator stood alone on the platform. He looked at the final page. The evidence came back. Beneath it were the words, "But not everyone did." He closed the file. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the station lights turned on. One by one, the old railway clock began moving again. 3:17, 3:18, 3:19. Time had finally started. The investigator walked toward the exit, but when he reached the door, he stopped. There was no exit, only another railway platform. He turned around. The station behind him had changed. The old train was gone. The modern station was gone. Everything was different. The walls were clean. The lights were modern. The platform signs were new. He looked at the station name. It was the same station, but the date on the electronic display was wrong. 2026. He checked his phone. No signal, no network, no messages. Then his colleagues appeared at the end of the platform. They were alive. They were standing exactly where he had left them. He ran toward them. What happened? They stared at him. One of them asked, "Where have you been?" He looked at the clock. Only seconds had passed, but he remembered everything. The passenger, Elias, the photographer, Station 17, the first file, the train. He opened his hands. The black file was gone. His colleagues looked confused. "What are you holding?" "Nothing." They checked the platform. Nothing. No file. No suitcase. No photographs. No evidence. Everything had disappeared. The investigation was over. Or so they thought. 3 days later, the investigators returned to their office. The case files had been restored. Every previous case was closed. Every document was normal. There was no mention of Station 17, no mention of the passenger, no mention of Elias Voss, no mention of the photographer. The black file did not exist. The investigators began to wonder if they had imagined everything. Then an envelope arrived. No sender, no address. Just one black envelope. Inside was a photograph. The photograph showed the 4 investigators standing on the railway platform, exactly as they had been 3 days earlier. But there was one difference. A 5th person stood behind them. The passenger. The investigator turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back. "You remembered." Then another line appeared beneath it. "That is why it came back." The investigator placed the photograph on the desk. Nobody spoke. Then the office telephone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. The caller ID showed nothing. The investigator answered. There was silence. Then a voice. "The passenger. Did you find the file?" The investigator could barely speak. It disappeared. The voice replied, "No." A pause. It returned. The line went dead. The investigator looked down. The black envelope was still on the desk, but the photograph was gone. In its place was a railway ticket. Seat 17. Departure, 3:17 a.m. Destination, the last station. The investigator looked at the office clock. 3:16 a.m. He slowly stood. Outside the window, there was no railway, no tracks, no station, but he heard a train whistle. He walked toward the window. A train light appeared in the darkness. Coming closer, the office lights flickered. Then every computer screen turned black. One message appeared across every monitor. The black file was never lost. A second line appeared. "You were." The investigator turned around. His colleagues were gone. The office was empty. Only the black envelope remained. He opened it. Inside was one final photograph. It showed him standing inside a train, alone, holding the black file. On the back was a handwritten sentence. "The passenger has left." Then another. "The investigator has arrived." The telephone rang again. 3:17 a.m. He answered. This time, nobody spoke. He could hear only the sound of a train moving through darkness. Then a faint voice whispered, "Your case has begun." The line went dead. The screen went black. And for the first time, the black file had no passenger, no photographer, no keeper, no investigator, only evidence, waiting to come back.